What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Thanks for coming back and joining me on season 5 of the Coventry City rebuild. If you've been with me for the past couple of episodes, you'd have seen that we broke back into the Premier League in the last episode. For the first time since 2001, Coventry played top flight football and we achieved an 11th place finish. Today, we have pushed on. It's now the end of season 5 and we have had our second attempt at Premier League football. Can we progress? Have we moved further up the table? Let's jump in and find out. Once again, we're going to kick things off with the transfers, the new faces that have come into the club and the faces that have left the club. Now, obviously, second season back in the Premier League is a difficult one. We had a squad that was capable in the first season, but we really needed to kick on. There was a bigger wage budget and transfer budget for us to work with, and we had to try and improve the squad in most areas. So let's break down the transfer business that we did, starting with some of the players that left the club in the first phase of the transfer window. So we had Harrison Nee and Isaac Price leave the club on free transfers. We sold Ben Woodburn, a player that we bought in who was a bit more experienced than some of the players we had. Couldn't really break himself into the first team, so we have allowed him to move on. He went to Reading for a total of £2 million. The next player that left the club was Jackson Conway. He was an American that I really liked the look of at the start of the game, worked his way through Atlanta's youth teams, and then even switched his allegiance to Scotland later on in the game. He was a player that wasn't going to break into the team. We moved into the Premier League. He isn't of that standard, so we allowed him to move on. He went to Motherwell for 115,000. Sold Ethan Wardy, who was our cup goalkeeper. We allowed him to go to Blackpool for 28,000. Ted and Mengi, another rock at the centre of our championship-winning defence. Fortunately, he wasn't going to cut it in the Premier League, so we allowed him to move on too. He went to Rotherham for 600,000. The first of the big sales that we made was Ethan Galbraith, a player who had firmly established himself in that defensive midfielder role in the Championship, had to go in the Premiership, wasn't as effective. The money came in from Trabzonspor. We decided to take £5 million for him, and I think that was a pretty good deal for both him and the club. Talon Shepherd and Malachi Fagan Walcott were the other two players to go out on loan in this section. And then we started the rebuild once again. So the first player that we bought in was Joe Gelhardt. Now, if you've been around Football Manager for the past couple of years, this is a name that crops up on the Wonder Kid lists. He is kind of breaking through at Leeds, getting himself a little bit of game time here and there. Not really established himself as a first teamer there yet. But for the money that we paid, 2.5 million rising to 2.6 million, this seemed like a gamble worth taking. We had one or two players at the club that weren't really going to cut it in the Premier League. And I thought with his youth, I mean, he's 25 now, so he should really be in that fully developed stage of his career, and if he's going to make it at a club, I thought we'd give him the chance at Coventry. The next player that we signed, now these are, the next couple of players are a blend of both youth players that we've poached from other clubs and kind of poaching from the next gen top 50. Don't really know if that's cheating, whether we should be using our scouts to find players, but if the next gen top 50 is there and available and you can see it freely, surely that's as good as being able to scout some players. But I'll explain that when we get to them. The first of the players we poached was a player from Liverpool, Lefteris Constantinou, 19-year-old Cypriot defensive midfielder, one very much for the future. We signed Charlie Hadland. We poached him as well. We poached John Wall from Arsenal and then loaned him out. It says on loan from Coventry. Where do we loan him to? We loaned him somewhere. Adam Jenks is another player that we picked up from Arsenal. Lucas Melinar was the first of the players that we poached from the next gen list. Now, obviously, you can see that the players themselves are really good prospects. He is a Slovakian. He has played 11 times for his national team. He's 19 years old. Featured on the next gen 50 Wonder Kids list. Just kind of went and picked them up. I mean, for the money we paid, £900,000 from Slovan Bratislava, that could turn out to be an absolute bargain. The next one was Zarko Bogdanovic. He's another of these next-gen 50 players that we just went and kind of poached. He, though, is turning into some player. He's a Serbian central defender, valued now at 26 to 38 million pounds. Did have to promise he would be a regular starter in the Premier League, and we put him on £23,000. But he's one that is really going to have an influence across the season, I think. The next player to come in was Eva Quiros Gardona. He's a Mexican, 19 years old. Again, 4 caps for his national team. Comes in looking fantastic, pace, acceleration, dribbling, finishing, first touch. Maybe not the finished article at 19, but he's one that, again, he's going to get into the first team and going to have first team games. Neil Maupay was the next player that we signed. How much did we sign him for, just quickly? 7.75 million for Neil Maupay. So again, another player who is Premier League experienced, one that could probably teach Joe Galhart. If there's anything left to get out of Joe Galhart, I think Neil Maupay could probably help to extract it. Don't know whether Maupay is going to be that first teamer or whether Galhart will be, but whichever one is playing the more regular, I think they can push each other. We know Maupay scores goals in the Premier League, and hopefully it will be a gamble that pays off at 7.75 million. The next player in was another next-gen player, Leonardo Zaminga, 20 years old, valued now at 11.5 to 15 million pounds. We did have to pay a lot more, 4.5 million pounds for him, but I think he could turn into a bargain long term. Next player is Gianluca Gaetano. Who did we sign him from? Was it Cremonese? Yeah, Cremonese, even though he's in a Napoli shirt in the top corner, Parton Hope shirt in the top left-hand corner. Another player with big league experience. He comes in expecting to be a regular starter on £35,000 a week. He's a former Italian under-21 international player who is quick and dynamic, can play from both wings, can play in the midfield too. And the final player that we signed in this phase of the transfer window was Rio Hatate. He is a former Celtic midfielder who we managed to get on a free transfer. He'd been on a scouting list for a long time. Our scouts told us to just go and buy him. Luckily, we waited it out. Celtic didn't renew the contract. We have managed to pick him up. He had a big enough reputation to get a work permit. He's going to slot into our midfield and play some wonderful football, I'm sure. So, in the next part of the transfer window then, this is where a lot more activity ended up happening. There are a few players that have, you're going to see here, that have not yet been announced, that have already left the club, but we'll work through that as we get along to it. So the first big sale of this part is Max Elaine. We sold him to Stoke for £2.4 million. There was a lot of free transfers, Matty Longstaff being one, got him off the wage bill, that was good. Jack Hinchy went to Aldershot. Then a lot of loans for youth teamers. Players like Marco Russo still developing, Josh Nichols. Cole McKinnon left the club to go to Venezia, £105,000 recouped for him. One of the players I think we signed early on in the save. Then we had another load of loans where we were just basically sending out youth teamers to go and get experience. There are a few in here that are a bit dodgy, like Martin Ortega was a player that we signed for the first team, become unhappy when he couldn't become a first team regular, wanted massive wage demands. He's ending up now playing for QPR. Luke McCormack went out on loan, Thomas Jacob, Leighton Clarkson, Julio Cesar. If we come down the list, you can see that Peter Andrade is one that is worth giving a mention to. Another youth teamer that has been coming through the ranks. He had a spell on loan at Rotherham, scored 6 in 43. He's valued at 23 to 31 million pounds. We have been receiving bids from big clubs for him, so hopefully once we get him back on loan, when we go into season 6, which I can reveal is happening, hopefully he can be in and around the first team and having a bit of influence. Next player to leave was Juan Caceres, another right back who couldn't get into the team. I thought we were going to get a lot better out of him than what we did. Didn't really perform in the Premier League, so we have moved him on. Alan Franco was another one, wanted extortionate money, and this is one of my bugbears about Football Manager. I absolutely love the game. I have no concerns about match engines and some of the things that some of the people out there were saying, this FM23 isn't that great. I have no problem with all of that. The thing that needs fixing for me is the finances with the AI. So when you approach a club that is AI and you want to sign their player, all of a sudden that player wants £50,000 a week. And when you buy a player and you want to renew their contract, the AI will then say, I'm a first teamer, I want 50 grand a week. And that's what happened here. Alan Franco wanted a new deal, wanted to reflect his ability. We offered him a contract, he wanted 50 grand. There was no way I was going to pay it. So he then got unhappy, decided to leave the club, and when we sold him to Lorient, he takes £17,000 a week to go and be a regular starter in France. Now that makes no sense to me because he was already on more than that. I think he was on about 32 grand at Coventry. Wanted 50, we wouldn't pay it because I wanted that extra 18,000 to give to another player, and off he goes to Lorient on a lot less money. Makes no sense to me, but I don't design the game. Obviously, it's something that is probably difficult to control, but the AI should probably reduce their expectations of what you're going to pay for a player if they don't have as high expectations of when... Yeah, it just doesn't make sense. He could have stayed at Coventry on more money and not kicked off and wanted to leave. Instead, he took a deal to go somewhere else for less money, but when we wanted to re-sign him, it's 50 grand. I don't get it, but hey-ho, we move on. The next player that you're going to not be introduced to, but he's already left the club, so let's introduce him first. So we signed Solly March. As you can see, we picked him up on a free transfer. Another of these players who's played in the Premier League, 32 years old, bit more experienced, kind of like a leader of the group. Came in, he was a squad player, was happy to take squad player. And then all of a sudden, halfway through the season, decided, he doesn't want to be a squad player anymore. He wants to run off and go and play football somewhere else. So again, we took a deal for him and we got him for nothing, sold him for 5.75 million. So if some of these deals don't work out, we are at least proving that we can get money in the bank. Next player to leave was Christian Joel Sanchez. Didn't like the fact he was replaced as a goalkeeper. He did have an injury, which was the reason that we had to replace him in the first place. So, kind of swings and roundabouts. Not too fussed about that one. Ismail Caballo went out on loan. Laurent Talage has left the club. He went to Trabzonspor. This one actually did pull on the heartstrings because he was one of the players that we managed to sign early on in the rebuild. Had done really, really well for the club. Didn't want to let him go, but he kind of sensed that he wasn't going to be Premier League standard. And we were going out and buying players that are. And he just asked to leave. And we said, you've done fantastic for the club. That whole nugget in the... manager-player interactions where it's like, for everything you've done, we won't stand in your way, and off he goes. Next player, Samuel Dobson. He's gone out on loan. We have Brody Hughes out on loan. Winlock, Santiago Hidalgo. Harrison McMahon left. He went to Bristol City for £1.7 million. Another one we picked up for nothing at the start, so a good deal there. Tommy Doyle was another player that we have managed to move on. Signed him again on a free transfer. We managed to move him on to Celtic. Another one who just decided one day he was worthy of £60,000 in a Coventry team where the maximum wage we were paying at that point was around 33,000. Just the expectation as you move through the divisions just absolutely skyrockets, and he was never going to get the game time he wanted after that. So he became unhappy and again asked to leave. The next player was Coney de Winter. Rock solid at the base of our championship winning team. Obviously, step up to the Premier League is a big thing. He has moved on to Norwich, but we did get 5.25 million for him, so it was a good deal for everybody involved. Jung Sang Bing has left. Again, he's another one that kind of guessed that he wasn't going to be involved as a first teamer, or certainly a regular starter in the first team. Asked to move on. He said he wanted a new challenge. He'd done everything he could with Coventry in the space for about a season and a half, so another one we didn't stand in his way and we allowed him to move on. Fernandez, Wilson and John Patrick, they all went out on loan with Nathan Ferguson joining them. John Patrick, there is a little issue with him. He wants first team football, but again, I don't think he's going to be of a Premier League standard. So we've loaned him out now with a view to selling him on in the future, I think. So after all that business coming in, you can see we recouped £34.5 million. It meant that we had to go and strengthen the squad in most places. And the first thing we did was went and bought a centre midfielder. Now this is going to be hopefully the linchpin of the Premier League campaign for this season. He is Mykola Shaparenko. He's a Ukrainian who has played for his national team 52 times. He has experience. Age 28, so the right age for a midfielder to be at the peak of his powers. We agreed to a star player playing time because he's going to be a first teamer, and he has had a solid season, I can tell you that much. Next player was Solly March. Obviously, we've already covered that with him going out. The next player we signed was Kofi Cow. He's a right back, and that is the reason why the other two right backs, Caceres and Ortega, were allowed to leave or go out on loan somewhere. Again, pace and acceleration and tackling were the main things behind this, and also the fact he was a free transfer that played into our decision making. The next player we signed was Anthony Alanga. Couldn't believe Manchester United had allowed him to leave. Probably hasn't developed as well as he looks like developing in real life. Does have 17 pace, does have 17 acceleration, does have 14 dribbling, and if we could just fine-tune a few of the other stats, I mean, he's 25 now. It does say he could still improve at the bottom there, but he's had issues himself along the season, but he was a real positive signing when we signed him in July. The next player we signed was Manuel Roffo for £3.2 million. He became our first choice goalkeeper. There was an injury to Sanchez, which meant that he was out for the first 3 months of the season. We had to go and pick up a goalkeeper, and Manuel Roffo fitted the bill. Former Boca Juniors player, playing for Tigre. The money was right. Wages were £30,000, so we didn't have to smash the bank. I mean, there are players that we're going to sign for more money later on this list, but needs must when we got to, like, January. So when we did get to January, once again, we went down the path of signing players with Premier League experience, the first of which was Che Adams. He did come in on £40,000 a week, so it is starting to creep up. He's a regular player who's in his prime years. As I said, Premier League experience with Southampton, played a lot of games, did score 63 in 263 games, so quite impressive for a Premier League record. I think that's quite good. We are going to play him as a left winger or a right winger. I don't think he's going to get in up top. We're going to try and use a bit of pace and acceleration that he has. The next player we signed was Yaya Callon, and again, this is another one that you're just going to be able to see straight away what we've done. Versatile player first and foremost, can play in a number of positions, then pace of 15, acceleration of 16, dribbling of 15, finishing of 12, first touch of 13. Work rate could be a bit better. Again, he scored 28 and 125 for Genoa, so if he can come in and replicate a little bit of that form for us, we would be happy. The next player we brought in was Valerio Crespi. He's a player that is on some Wonderkid lists. He's 22 years old now. He's valued at 11 to 12 million pounds. We did sign him as an emergency backup player, which is actually quite impressive because I thought he was going to ask for a lot more. Coming on 33.5 grand though, so there is probably the chance that if he gets first team games and scores goals, he will ask for a bigger contract. And the final one that we needed to shore up the defence at the back was Max Kilman. He is 30 years old now, and he is a player who should be in his prime years. 6'4", good tackling, quick in terms of pace and acceleration. He has everything that we're going to need to be competitive, certainly in a Premier League defence. Pairing him alongside some of the other defenders, I think we've got a good partnership. He preferred foot is left, so he can always play on the left-hand side as well. Can be a makeshift left-back. So it was all there. The money was right. West Ham selling him to us for £7 million. So it meant that eventually, at the end of July, we had spent £30 million. In fact, in total, at the end of January is what I'm looking for. We had spent £30 million, recouped £34.5 million, and we had managed to overhaul the team in a sensible way that didn't break the bank. And speaking of the bank, let's have a little look at what is going on with the finances at the club then. So as I said, I didn't want to bankrupt the club, and I didn't want to do it unrealistically where we go and spend £80 million on one player, because Coventry just wouldn't do that. But we are now in a position where we are growing in stature, £71.2 million in the bank, £85 million available to us for season 6 in terms of a transfer budget. And we're going to get stuck now where realism kind of fades into the background a little bit. I'm still not going to go and buy Endrick or anybody like that, because that just doesn't happen. It wouldn't happen. But as Coventry are establishing themselves, we do need players with a bigger profile. £85 million is going to allow us to buy a decent amount of good players that are going to push the club forwards. Hopefully in season 6 we are going to progress further than what we have done in this season. In terms of the wage budget, we're spending £1.353 million. We have a wage budget now of 1.417, so there is a good gap there between those two numbers that allows us to go and try and attract the type of players that we're going to need in season 6. Let's quickly have a little look at the Club Vision tab. You can see our job security is very secure now. They have been impressed with what we have done across season 5. Looking at the actionable objectives, work within the wage budget, we're on course. Spend the original transfer budget. Now, I'm not too sure why this pops up in pretty much every game these days. The club want us to go out and spend £85 million, even though they've got 71 in the bank. I understand now that we're finishing higher in the league and we're a Premier League team again, there's more money coming in, but I don't really want to go out and bust the bank, so we'll tread carefully with that one. A little bit of giveaway here as to what has happened across the season, but you can see that they want to be competitive in the Champions League. Yes, competitive in the Champions League whilst avoiding relegation from the Premier League. So interesting that those two things go hand in hand. But looking at the board feedback then, the board are delighted with the leadership qualities we are demonstrating. Last season's successes remain fresh in our memories, and our appraisal of your current performance takes that into account. So they now want us to play possession football, entertaining football, and play high tempo pressing football, and we're doing okay with all three of those. Notable highlights across the season: pleased with the 3-2 win against Crystal Palace, fairly happy with the number of goals scored of late, pleased with the positive atmosphere in the changing room, disappointed about a 0-0 draw against Brighton. If we look at the supporters' feedback, we have an A- from the supporters. They want us to play possession football, play entertaining football, and play high tempo pressing football. They still want to be competitive against Leicester, and they only want us to attempt to avoid relegation from the Premier League. They're pleased with the 3-2 victory against Crystal Palace, pleased with the comprehensive 4-1 triumph against Brentford, pleased with the 2-0 win against Southampton, disappointed in Leonardo Zaminga's recent performances. He's a young player who will get better. Disappointed about a 0-0 draw against Brighton, disappointed with Zé Ivaldo's recent performances. And that is part of the reason why we signed Max Kilman. Okay, so we gave a little bit away there. A little bit of information cropped up in that Club Vision tab that exposed what's happened across the season. And you can see that we have managed to finish 5th in our second season back in the Premier League. Now, we were nowhere near the top guns. Liverpool finishing masses of points ahead of us. But we were close enough to Manchester City to only be 3 points behind. We were 7 points behind Newcastle and only 8 points behind Arsenal. And it meant that we were putting up a good fight in the Premier League across the season. We finished ahead of Manchester United, Tottenham and Chelsea, which I think is a massive, massive result. The FA Cup, we were knocked out in the third round by Wolves. And in the Carabao Cup, we got all the way to the final, where we faced off against Manchester City and unfortunately were toppled 3-1. If we go through some of the stages just to show you how we progressed. Second round, we beat Carlisle 2-0. Third round, we beat Everton on penalties. The fourth round, we beat Preston 2-1. The quarter-final stage, we beat Newcastle on penalties after a 1-1 draw. In the semi-finals, we beat Wolves 4-3 on aggregate. And then unfortunately, we got to the final, but we were no match for Manchester City. They beat us 3-1. And we almost had a repeat of 1987 with a domestic cup going to Coventry, but unfortunately it wasn't to be. If we have another look at the Premier League then and go into the stages as always and show you what happened, you can see that we played 38 games. We won 19 of them. We drew 10. We did lose 9. Scored 71 goals, which was quite impressive. We conceded 48. And we had a goal difference of 23, so that's better than last season also. Finished on a record high number of points for Coventry with 67. And as I said, we weren't too far behind Manchester City, Newcastle and Arsenal, but Liverpool were way, way out of reach. When we look towards the bottom, you can see that last season we were clear of it by a fair margin. This season we are massively away from it. We are now hopefully going to lose that tag of relegation fodder, and we're going to start to be able to be classed as a mid-table team. We are now 2 seasons in, so by the end of season 6 it'll be a 3rd season in the Premier League. Hopefully we can still progress. If we look at the profile screen then, you can see that across the season Erling Haaland did score 30 goals. Let's see where our top goal scorer was. Our top goal scorer was Joe Gelhardt. He got himself 15 goals. Anybody else on the list? There is not. We look at the average ratings. Erling Haaland led the way on that front with 7.54. We didn't get anybody on the list at all. In terms of assists, Rooney Bargy got himself 13 and finished just 1 behind Christopher Nkunku. And that really shows just how good Rooney Bargy is. I mean, it's not really the point where we show you the squad players, but just have a look at Rooney Bargy. He's a player that I can't believe we managed to get to Coventry for £10 million. And he's a player that is now leading the way in terms of the team. He's a star player. And he's the one player that we have broke the bank for. We renewed his contract to 31 and gave him £70,000 a week, which is massive amounts of money for Coventry. Player of the Match Awards. Let's see, did we get anybody in there? Joe Gelhardt getting 4. Clean sheets. Let's have a look. Manuel Roffo got 12 clean sheets across the season and finished in 6th place. Yellow cards, Hamer, Bogdanovic, Cow, getting 17, 16 and 15. So discipline was a thing that we were really having to watch towards the end of the season. And then we don't have anybody in the bottom three stats there. So all in all, a fantastic second season back in the Premier League. Absolutely amazing to see Coventry City back in the mix with the likes of Manchester United, Manchester City, finishing above mighty Chelsea. Really was a stellar season for a second one back in the Premier League. Finally, let's have a little rundown of the squad then. Across the past season, this was our best 11. So, Roffo was in goal, Flynn, Watts, Kilman and Cow. We then had Hamer, Hatate and Shaparanko in the middle of the park. Elanga wide left, Bargy wide right and Gelhardt at the top. So this is the team that managed to get 5th place in the Premier League. It's going to be difficult to improve this team, I think. There are certain positions where we might have to have upgrades though. Watts and Kilman are sound as centre-backs, but I do feel there is a little bit more in terms of quality that we could have. Hamer has been with us since the start of the save, so don't really want to replace him, but I do feel there's better options for defensive midfielders. The midfield two, Hatate and Shaparenko, have been fantastic. Elanga on the wide left, as I said, I can't believe Manchester United just let him go. We picked him up for nothing, unless there is an absolute worldy option out there. Him and Rooney Bargy, if we just keep hold of him, nobody comes along. I think, let's just have another look at him. If we look at his contract details, he does have a release clause of £68 million. So unless somebody comes along and pays £68 million, I think he will be here throughout the whole of Season 6. And he's a player that hopefully is going to drag the club forwards. I mean, he does have a release clause for relegation of 34, but that's really not happening at all. Joe Gelhardt at the top of the pitch. Only a real, should we call it, world-class striker is going to come and get in ahead of Joe Gelhardt. I mean, even Neil Mopai couldn't unlodge him from that spot. He kind of made it his own by the halfway point of the season. Looking at the strengths and the weaknesses then, youth prospects, a number of talented young prospects at the club. Left terrace, Constantino, Peter Slane and Jeff Thompson. Good through balls. Best player form, Joe Gelhardt, with 7.36 in his last 5 matches. We have good defence depth. We have good goalkeeping, defence, midfield, kicking, creativity. In terms of the weaknesses, marking, concentration, composure, long throws, leadership. Clear lack of leadership. Now, that's why I was buying experienced players, to try and lead by example on the pitch. Obviously, it hasn't happened with the players that I've bought, so I do need to go out there and maybe try and find a player that is going to be a clear leader of the dressing room. Crossing, handling, tackling, penalties, all the kind of standard things that we aren't really good at, but could be improved as we go along. Let's have a little look at the other version of the best 11 then. So, looking at this version, this is Matt Well's opinion. We've got Roffo in goal, Flynn, Watts, Kilman and Cow, Hamer, Hatate and Shaparenko, Elanga, Bargy and Gelhardt. So the exact same team as the previous report. Then looking at the players coming through, so we've got Reynolds in goal, Bayliss, Zaminga, Bogdanovic, Brody Hughes, Lucas Molinar, Hadland, Maitland, Andrade, Zephy and Quiroz Gardona. And that really makes sense because those are the players we poached. So we poached, where's he gone? Quiroz Gardona was on the list. Maitland, Hadland we poached from Chelsea. Who was the other player we poached? There was another player we poached. But it just shows that the players that we went out, it was the Cypriot Lefteris Constantino. So those kinds of players are showing up now in the reports, and it shows that if we were to continue this save on past the 6th season, those are the players that are going to pick themselves up and really progress on and hopefully be the future of Coventry City. Right then, that is pretty much Season 5 done. Plans for Season 6 will be put in place straight away. As I said, it's going to be difficult to try and replace some of these players, only if there are players available, probably on the transfer list. I'm not going to go and spend £80 million on one player, but I might spend £10 million on 8 players, if that works. Then again, do we need 8 players looking at the bigger picture of what the squad's going to look like. If the right player comes along, we will pick up the right player. Again, trying to make it as realistic as possible. Don't expect to see Endrick pop up in Season 6. It's not going to happen. He wouldn't sign for a Championship club. He's just signed for Real Madrid. So, yeah, it's not going to happen. But there are players out there that I think could be realistic, especially with Coventry growing in stature. I think that we are going to have to try and build that next step to try and take the next step for the club, and that is exactly what we're going to try and do for Season 6. Right then, I'm going to start to wrap this one up. If you're still here at this point of the video, firstly, a big thank you. Really do appreciate everybody who takes their hard-earned time to come watch the videos, interact. Don't forget to leave a comment if there's anything you like or don't like. Hit the thumbs up and the subscribe button to help the channel out. Don't forget also, on the channel we have other things like hints, tips, Wonder Kids, tutorials, Let's Plays, something for everybody. But for this one, I'm going to leave it there. I'll catch you on another video soon.